asking that then it was time for them to return already. The swordsman turned his gaze to the brown-haired man, noting that there were two possible options. Either the soldiers were too lazy, or the protagonist frowned, saying that something had happened to them. After which he stood up, saying that they needed to find out everything. Xavier put his hand in front of the main character. He looked at the brown-haired man with a serious look, said that if the task was to take place in this, then he would go one, and he did not know exactly what could have happened and thought that he should not go. The brown-haired man squinted at the knight, asking that they had already discussed this. The protagonist put his hand to his side, noting that he was in charge of the construction and was responsible for the workers. Xavier closed his eyes and sighed heavily. Lloyd said that it was time to go. White clouds floated over the deserted cliffs. A glove lay in the middle of the road. The protagonist leaned towards the glove, picking it up. He noted that these were the gloves he ordered for insulation work. Xavier squinted and looked away, calling out to the protagonist. The guys were standing on the edge of a cliff. Xavier said that there was some kind of strange atmosphere in this gorge. Lloyd asked how strange it was. The brown-haired man looked at the knight in bewilderment. The swordsman said that the flow of mana there was quite unusual, and there was no accuracy since everything was blurred. Lloyd wondered what was blurred and what kind of gorge this was. The protagonist looked ahead thoughtfully, noting that he had seen something like this on the pages of the novel Knight of Iron and Blood, after which he looked ahead dumbfounded. The main character abruptly went the other way, telling Xavier that they were leaving and that they had little time. The knight asked what he had discovered. The brown-haired man looked ahead with a frightened look, declaring that their soldiers might no longer be alive. Xavier looked at the protagonist in horror. White clouds were floating above the rocks. The protagonist stood on the ground in front of the straw, after which he leaned over to it, taking it in his hand. Lloyd was squeezing the straw in his hand. The guys approached the cave. The protagonist noted that this was the Ruffle Gorge. The guys looked at the cave with a serious look. Brown-haired noted that at the very beginning of the novel, this place was mentioned as one of Xavier's goals, and the dark mage Ruffle was hiding there. Lloyd wondered how he dared to touch their soldiers. Brown-haired's face twisted into a furious grimace. He wondered if entering private property was equated to a sin. The knight entered the cave, taking hold of his blade. He told the master to follow him. Lloyd asked to wait for him. Xavier stepped on the magic circle with his foot. The protagonist grabbed the swordsman by the coat, pulling him towards himself. An explosion occurred in front of the guys. They stood with their backs to the hole in the ground. The knight asked if it was a magic trap. The protagonist looked at the guy in bewilderment, asking if he was sure he was a knight, noting that he should calculate such moments in advance. Lloyd imagined the image of a wounded Xavier. He thought that in the novel, Xavier fell into the same trap when he was wounded and looking for cover. The knight slightly opened his mouth, after which he continued his way through the cave. Lloyd noted that their Xavier never makes mistakes twice. The brown-haired man pointed his finger to the side, asking what he said, that the flow of mana there is unusual. I suggest using my technique there too. The swordsman closed his eyes and spread his arms to the sides. The protagonist said that in a natural environment, mana has a constant concentration in the atmosphere. Blue particles of mana were flying in space. The hero said that this way he would be able to understand where the magical traps were. The blue energy particles connected with each other. Lloyd noted that he felt an unusual concentration of mana. Xavier looked ahead with a serious look. The protagonist followed the knight with a smile. The blue-haired guy said that they should go there. The protagonist noted that his senses were well sharpened. The swordsman looked away warily, thinking that he only does what he lies and insists, but now everything is different. The protagonist threw the shovel over his shoulder, following the swordsman. Xavier wondered what was going on, adding that he predicts events before they happen. The swordsman continued to follow the road, wondering how, and he does not feel any special energy, but could it be such a powerful mana? The blue-haired guy pursed his lips, thinking that first they need to figure out what awaits them ahead. The boys continued their way through the cave. The swordsman noted that they needed to save the hostages as quickly as possible. In the cave stood a man in black robes with a hood over his head, after which he looked back with a serious look. The boy stood near a table with books. He wondered if the trap had worked and someone had come to them, and who it could be. The man slammed the book shut, saying that he would find out soon, after which he approached the door, noting that he thought his preparations were complete. The man moved the lock on the door, thinking that his experiment would be successful. There were tied men in a locked room. The guy said he hoped. The mage pulled the guy out of the room by his hair, who begged for mercy. Then he threw the man into a magic circle. The mage picked up a scythe, looking in front of him with a terrifying look. He said that this was a magic circle that connected with hell and the merciless scythe of the Reaper, waiting for its time for 100 days in a vessel with blood and a young life. The mage swung his scythe, saying that it was perfect. The man closed his eyes, screaming loudly. The protagonist called out to the guy in the robe. The guy looked back with a crazy look. The brown-haired man looked at the guy with an enraged look, telling him not to touch him. Ruffalin put his hand in front of himself, creating a magic circle. He asked that they were crazy people, wondering how they got around all the traps. The guys stood in front of Ruffalin, after which a wall appeared in front of them. A wall soon appeared behind the guys. The protagonist opened his mouth wide, taking in air. Lloyd stood with his cheeks puffed out. The guys were ready for battle. Ruffalin smiled maliciously, thinking that he would put them to sleep with magic and then get even. The protagonist's eyes began to glow green. He thought that he was a lively guy. The system notified that he would not feel tired for 10 minutes. The brown-haired man began to furiously dig the ground, thinking that a couple of minutes would be enough for him, because now he was no longer in an ant tunnel. Xavier began to rub his eyes. Lloyd noted that Xavier had never taken medication for insomnia, so no sleeping pill would work on him. The protagonist dug a hole in the ground, noting that he had already gone too far. The knight looked down with a serious look, thinking that he looked like a mole, and when the opportunity presented itself, he would laugh at it. The protagonist began to point his finger to the knight, thinking that he should quickly go there. The swordsman stood in the tunnel, swinging his weapon. Energy appeared around the blade. The knight thrust his blade into the wall. He used the explosion skill. A pillar of fire appeared in front of the magician, after which he fell to the ground in horror, watching what was happening. A huge hole appeared in the ground. The protagonist's hand rose from the hole. Lloyd began to rise from the tunnel. He fell out of the hole, looking at the magician with a terrifying look, saying that he had never seen such a huge monster before. Ruffalin bared his teeth, creating magic circles, thinking that he had never seen such a huge monster. The magician pressed his hands to the ground, creating a huge magic circle. A huge monster with 2 heads appeared behind the magician. The man smiled madly, thinking that even though his experiment had failed, this was his most powerful creation. A huge, terrifying monster stood before the boys. The mage thought that they should at least try to scratch his steel armor. The protagonist looked away in confusion, saying that they would have a hard time in his weak legs. Lloyd looked at Xavier in bewilderment, who jumped into the air. The swordsman delivered a fiery slashing blow to the monster using the skill ripping wave. Xavier cut the monster in half. Ruffalin watched in horror. The protagonist's eyes widened in surprise. He wondered if he could use the power of the explosion as an auxiliary force and cut in half. Xavier leaned slightly, putting his weapon back in its sheath. Lloyd wondered why the novel didn't mention this technique. The boys stood in a pompous stance. The mage looked at the guys with horror, thinking that he was in trouble and no matter what he did, he would not be able to defeat them. The protagonist squatted down next to the man. He looked at the mage with a terrifying look, saying that he had kidnapped their soldiers and now their construction had stopped because of him, asking how he was going to pay him. Ruffalin bowed before the protagonist, thinking that it would be better for him to lie down on the ground for now because he had to survive by any means. The mage said that he had committed a great sin and was begging for forgiveness. Lloyd noted that he should not say that, and he was asking about compensation for the damage caused. The man looked ahead with horror, saying that there were many valuable things there and he would give them everything. The protagonist grinned slyly, asking that this was true, and therefore it was all his. The man said that of course he could take everything. Xavier pulled the worker out of the room by the arm, telling the master that the soldiers were severely exhausted, but their lives were not in danger. Lloyd said that was great and he was glad to hear it. The protagonist looked at the mage with a cold gaze, saying that in a couple of days they would have been dead, asking what he was going to do with them. The mage bared his teeth, saying that he was doing research, trying to find out how to bring the dead back to life. The protagonist looked at the man with disdain, asking what was even possible and why he needed to know. The man narrowed his eyes. He continued to sit, bowing in front of the protagonist. Ruffalin stated that it was to bring back his wife and son. The protagonist looked at the mage with a serious look. Ruffalin remembered how he held his son in his arms with a smile and looked at his wife. He said that he was a mage in the house of a baron and lived an ordinary life with his family, and not just an ordinary one, he was happy. Ruffalin imagined the baron holding out his hand, and then the happy picture cracked. He said that the baron he served, he suddenly wanted to take his wife away from him, so he tried to escape with them. The protagonist closed his eyes, opening his mouth wide. Ruffalin said that the baron was chasing them. Lloyd told him to stop and that he was good at sculpting. He looked at the mage with a serious look, asking what it meant. If he saved his wife and son, they would thank him for killing hundreds of innocent lives and saving them, and that he thought they would thank him like that. The man looked at the protagonist with bewilderment. The brown-haired man noted that the ghouls he created. The hero looked at the man with a cold look. He asked that the lives of the people he sacrificed, their families, their happiness, and for him it all meant nothing, adding that he did not think that his story deserved pity. Xavier watched the events with a serious look. Brown-haired man told him not to speak, his true nature cannot be changed. Ruffalin looked down with a sad look. Brown-haired man noted that he had destroyed the happiness of so many families, and he would forever remain a murderer. Tears began to flow from the mage's eyes. The hero pressed his lips together. He rose to his feet.